I will say in the last 6 months, I've seen a huge shift in the engagement with the people listening. And the primary reason for that is I focused in on one platform for engagement. So I basically ask everyone on the podcast, if you enjoyed this, let me know on Twitter, or let me know your thoughts on Twitter. Whereas previously I was spreading myself too thin. I was saying, message me on Instagram, comment on YouTube, write a review. And I think that's a lot smarter, especially if you're starting from scratch.
This Audience Summit is brought to you in partnership with Podcast Notes, the best ideas from the world's best podcasts in minutes. Bilal, thank you so much for joining us on the Audience Summit. We're really excited to have you on as a contributor.
Great to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Absolutely. I had asked one of our previous contributors, Danny Miranda, who we should be bringing on for some ideas for filling out the last 10 or so slots, and he recommended your show, and I'm super glad that you said yes when we sent you the invite.
Yeah, for sure. No, Danny is a great guy. I'm actually going on his show fairly soon as well, so nice little collab going on there.
Absolutely. Real quick for everyone listening or watching on YouTube, could you give us a little background on yourself and talk about your show, the when and why you started it, and what the mission is?
Yeah, so the background on me is, as you can probably tell, I'm not originally from the States. I grew up in London, from the UK, but I've been in the States for about 8 years now. I'm the host of Creator Lab, which is a podcast, it's a business podcast, mostly with entrepreneurs, but I've also had leaders of nonprofits. I've had Emmy award-winning actors, and a bunch of really cool people. So yeah, I started that in 2015. And the main reason I started it, to be honest, was a little bit selfish. I was kind of in a rut myself. At the time, I'd been working at Google for, I think, 5 years at that point. And this was like a side project that gave me energy outside of work. And it gave me an excuse to go and have conversations with people that I thought were interesting. But generally, the mission of the show is to really empower people to go and create things that they want to create, whether that's a business or a nonprofit, if they want to go down the VC route and create the next Facebook, or if they want to be a bootstrapper, indie hacker. It's all about people finding their own path.
That is a great mission, and I've really enjoyed listening to some of the episodes and research for this. But our first question for you, what has been the most effective marketing channel for growing your podcast's audience, and how have you used it?
Yeah, it's hard to say one accurately, but I guess if I was to really estimate, because one piece of context I'll share is for a lot of people listening who don't have a podcast or are just new to it, to accurately really tell where people are coming from is actually quite difficult, because it's not like you have Google Analytics where on your website you can just see where people are coming from. With podcast analytics, it's a little bit kind of old school still. There's not that many great analytics, but from my estimation, I'd say that most of the people hear about the podcast through the guests, right? So that has been a big part of my strategy, is to focus on getting really great guests, having great conversations, but they also most of the time have their own audiences. So someone like Gary Vee, who we recorded a few years ago together, and he featured our conversation on all his platforms, including his own YouTube channel and podcast channels, to someone like Jack Butcher recently on Twitter, who's got a big engaged audience on Twitter and Instagram. And obviously when they share that out to their audiences, it really gets it out to new people. But one piece of context I'd also share is that a lot of the time that sounds super, like simple, like, oh, just go and find the biggest guest with the biggest follow account and ask them to tweet out. But what I would say is you should really differentiate between breadth versus depth, right? Because what that means is someone could have a lot of followers, but you don't actually know how engaged those people are. So for example, like you could have Kylie Jenner like tweet out to all of her followers, but if they're not interested in your stuff or they don't really trust her opinion, it's very different to a Jack Butcher who everyone who's following him really loves his stuff. So there's a differentiation to make there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great answer. So our second question for you is, what are some underrated tactics that you've used to attract listeners to your show?
Yeah, so I'd say it's really, so a lot of people launch their podcast and they follow the playbook of try to get in a new and noteworthy on Apple, encourage people to write reviews, and all those things are really important. But I think unless you're like a Tim Ferriss or someone who's already got some sort of audience from day one, it's quite hard to really make an impact like with enough scale, especially in 2021 where so many podcasts are out there. So I would say some of the things I've done, and it's quite hard to replicate, but I would recommend people at least explore this idea, is to look at the tier 2 kind of podcast platforms. So, and I've been able to make kind of deals or like basically get featured with some of those platforms on, in they're not like their editor's choice or like even on their homepage in some cases. So TuneIn Radio is one I did one with, where I actually hosted a whole day of recordings in their studio in San Francisco, and then they featured me for 2 weeks on their homepage with a massive banner to millions of people. I did the same with Castbox, which is one of the biggest platforms on Android. So most people are thinking of Apple in the US and Spotify, which are the bulk of the listens. But if you're starting from zero, it's really interesting to look at these other platforms and try to create connections there and see if you can do something together that's beyond just asking to be featured.
I think that's a great tip. Sometimes searching for those less traffic channels that are less competitive, you can make a much bigger impact, especially if you don't have that. The people like Tim Ferriss or that have those huge followings are going to be less interested in this content because they already have all of the audience and they just put out anything and millions of people sign up for it. So those are great tips for the kind of people watching this.
Yeah.
Our third question for you: how have you converted the listeners of your show into fans of your show? And in what ways do you think you've kept the same people coming back?
Yeah, I'd say, this is definitely a work in progress. So I can't say that every single person who's listened is listening to every single episode and they love me and they want to get my face tattooed on their arm. But I will say in the last 6 months, I've seen a huge shift in the engagement with the people listening. And the primary reason for that is I focused in on one platform for engagement. So I basically ask everyone on the podcast, if you enjoyed this, let me know on Twitter or let me know your thoughts on Twitter. Whereas previously I was spreading myself too thin. I was saying, message me on Instagram, comment on YouTube, write a review. And what I found from studying other people who've done this well and actually interviewing a bunch of them, so someone like Pomp was on the show and he talked a lot about how we built an audience in one place on Twitter, and then he moved it to email, then to podcast, then to YouTube, etc. And I think that's a lot smarter, especially if you're starting from scratch. So that's one thing. And I've been able to actually have really meaningful discussions with some of those people. And then I take it from, just Twitter to like doing things that don't scale is the kind of a phrase you'll hear people talk about. So that is time consuming, but it means like DMing those people or having one-on-one conversations. Like last week I had calls with 3 or 4 different people who listened to the show. I had Zoom calls. And just like creating that real relationship with those people, now the engagement is a lot higher. So that's one thing. And the second thing I'll add is I try to engage people before the interview. So I tweet out now to people who follow me, do you have any questions for this guest? Sometimes that guest also retweets it, which is great. But then you'll get a bunch of questions and you'll see I actually feature those questions on YouTube in the clips. So people can feel like, oh, I actually asked the question and it actually got featured sometimes. So I think that's been another cool thing people could potentially try.
Yeah, I think the idea of growing one or cultivating one audience first on one platform is something that we've heard repeated over and over again throughout this summit, and something that Lewis and I have not done a great job of honing in on one specific platform. So thank you again for reminding us of that. But the fourth question for you is, if you could go back, 5 years and start your show over again with what you've learned and what you know now about podcasting, what would you do differently to grow your show more effectively?
Yeah. And again, I think this is individual to each person and their strengths and why they're doing it. But for me personally, I would record video from day one. And I consciously didn't in the beginning because you have to focus your time and effort, and it's already quite an undertaking, as you guys know, to create a podcast once a week or once every 2 weeks, whatever you end up doing. So in the beginning, I had a full-time job, which took up all my time. And I said, okay, let me make this easy for myself. I'm just going to do audio, but I definitely wish I had video. Let me focus on audio, but I definitely wish I did video from day one. And I don't know if you guys have seen on Twitter, but I share these little clips, right? So they're like 1 or 2 minute clips. And nowadays, a lot of people do share some snippets. But what I would say is, like, if you notice on mine, they're all custom made. They're not just like the automated ones that you get from the software, because most of the time, the software can be helpful to scale your time, But in an age where there's so much content out there, it's really hard to stand out and customize it. So just a clip I put up a few days ago with Sean Puri, you'll see that there's like an image of him that pops up, and there's an Amazon buy button, and there's a sound, and there's B-roll and overlays and stuff like that. And we zoom in for a second and zoom back out. And that seems really small and it's a lot of work, but it's a way that I can stand out. And I get a lot of people messaging me saying, hey, that clip is really cool. What software did you use? And I was like, we use Final Cut Pro and Adobe. So it's not something you can just like press a button and it spits it out. But yeah, that's something I would definitely encourage people to think about. Like, what can they invest their time and energy into that's going to make them stand out?
I think those are really great tips and great takeaways. And anyone watching this and has seen a number of these is going to notice some patterns that the importance of video, it has been one of the most common answers is people like yourself who are already making successful podcasts, recognizing how much they left on the table from not having video from that first however many episodes they put out, and really trying to emphasize and bring home the point of how important and how valuable it can be, because it just adds another entire layer of potential ways you can repurpose content and make it more engaging and make better hooks and engage more emotions and get more listeners from all the different platforms. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, actually, can I just add one last thing on
Absolutely,
that really quickly?
Please.
So I worked at Google and YouTube, right? So I know a little bit
That's a good point.
background from there. Yeah. So, but no, the truth is, you ask most YouTube employees or Google employees to start a YouTube channel from scratch and to get to 1,000 subscribers. And to be honest, most probably wouldn't be able to do it, right? Like I help people get from a few 100,000 to millions, or I help brands spend millions on YouTube, and I understand that ecosystem and I can share the best practices. But until you go and create it yourself, and you have to have the humility to put out a video that's going to get 12 views and all your friends and family are going to see it, like that's what you're struggling with. It's not like even the ability to create something great. It's the mental challenge of, I'm going to put this out and no one's there. It's a black hole. So I know you guys know this because you've done it yourself, right? So I'd say I did learn some great best practices and things about the ecosystem there, but there's nothing better than actually doing it yourself. But what I was going to say is, from the YouTube side, a lot of people don't know that YouTube's the second biggest search engine in the world. So a lot of the time, people, even big YouTubers not big YouTubers, people I know who are doing pretty well on YouTube, I use a tool called TubeBuddy or vidIQ. There's two, and they're free tools, and you can pay for them as well. And that they just help you find tags to add to your keywords. They give you a checklist of things that you should have thought about, like a high res thumbnail, because you can put out a bunch of content, but no one's going to find it unless you do some of those basic things as well. And I think people make that mistake a lot of the time as well. They just think they're going to do what Gary Vee does and just put out an episode every day and put it on all the channels. And like we said before, you have to really focus your efforts and do what you can for that particular platform.
And I think that's an additional good point. The kind of SEO means more than just Google. It's these other search engines are worth paying attention to. But our last question for you, I'm not sure if you've done any paid promotion for your podcast, but hypothetically, if courtesy of the Lewis and Kyle Show Audience Summit, we gave you a free gift of $1,000 to come up with some clever way to market your podcast, find new listeners, do something to overall advance your mission, what would you do with the money and why?
Yeah, and I definitely have, and I've tested most of this. And my background, as I mentioned, is all about, like, I'm a marketer by trade. So I've done, marketing for 10, 15 years, digital marketing. So I'd say I know a decent amount about it. What I would say is, before I even spent money on ads or anything, though, I would make sure I invest in the product. And that sounds like a bit of a cop-out answer, but like, if you're starting and you've got $1,000 and you're using like AirPods to record your show, I would say spend $40, $50 and getting a good microphone, because it makes a huge difference. You don't have to spend $400 or $500 like this, but something that is gonna sound good quality, because that makes a huge difference. So I would just get the basics done, and then maybe I would consider investing that in editing time, right? Like, I work with an editor now, whereas previously I did all of it myself, and that person might have skills that I don't have, and they can maybe help you stand out from the crowd. But I don't want to leave you guys in the dark with it, because I'm sure you wanted to know a little bit about ads or marketing too. So on the ad side, let's say you've got those two checked off the list, and you've got a good product, you've got a good sounding podcast that's unique and stands out. there are some ads that I would recommend. So first of all, I would again focus first of all on like the platform that you've chosen, whether that's Twitter or Instagram or whatever. And then I would test out some ads. And, the one that I think have worked the best for me are Instagram ads, even though I'm not even that active on Instagram as a channel. So ideally, I should be spending my time creating content organically on Instagram and doubling up with ads. But for the sake of this, I'm saying my strategy is imperfect, right? But the targeting on Instagram and Facebook is the best, right? So I can target people with people who are only on iPhones in the US with interest in entrepreneurship overlaid with interest in podcasts. So that means that I'm really honing in on the sort of person I'm going after, and I'm only showing it to iPhone users. So I'm making it easy. I'm showing them a clip that I know has already worked on Twitter or somewhere else. And then there's an invite to say like, here, click this button and you can go and listen to the full episode. So that's something that I know most people don't do. And it's worth testing out for yourself. At the same time, again, ads can get quite expensive quite quickly. So I would, again, focus on, have you done those other things, those basics first? But I think also people kind of ignore ads a lot of the time too. Like ads are incredible, not just for podcasts, but just business in general. People think you create something great and everyone's just going to hear about it. And in 2021, that's not happening anymore because, the organic reach on these platforms is so small. Like to reach, if you've got 1,000 followers, you're only going to get 5 or 10% of them seeing your stuff even on Instagram. You might only get 1% of them seeing it on Facebook. So you need to at least think about how you're going to promote through paid channels as well. But yeah, that's probably what I would recommend to test out if I was picking one.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the interesting things that we've heard is paying for advertising on podcast platforms, because on social media, like Instagram or whatever, it's very high friction to go from an advertisement or an account to a podcast player. So it's like they see that advertisement and it's a button, but if it was on a podcast player, they might be more inclined to press it. So that's one interesting additional idea that we've heard from people on this summit. But
yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, I agree with that actually. I haven't tested that much myself, but I've had it on my list for a long time to do that as well.
Well, Bilal, thank you so much for coming on and joining us for this summit. We really appreciate it. If our listeners, the people that were watching, really like your answers, where should we send them to find you and to learn more about you?
Yeah, they can just tweet me. I'm at Zaidi on Twitter, at BZAIDI. And check out the show. It's Creator Lab on any platform. I'm also on YouTube, so just check that out. And I'm thinking of your audience. If I was recommending a couple to start with, you might enjoy that Jack Butcher episode, Sam Parr, the founder of The Hustle. And in a couple days, so by the time this goes out, it will be live. There's one with Tim Urban, who's a really famous writer.
Tim's huge.
Yeah, he doesn't really do many interviews.
Right? That's his thing, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So that'll be dropping on Wednesday, so check that out as well.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks for the invite, and speak to you guys soon.
Thank you so much for watching this interview. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, please subscribe to our channel right here on YouTube. And if you feel like you learned something, share this episode on social media to help us grow our audience as well.